Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Jonathan Baillie Strong, who runs Spotlight Media. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Will.
So Jonathan, I understand that you helped, among other things, Tim Ferris launch his podcast. That's amazing. Can we start with that story? That was a few years ago.
Sure thing. So I actually started off my career as a technology consultant. So working with telecom companies in London and nearby. And one of the things I did during that time there was I actually went on a sabbatical. And during that time, I met some interesting people, people sort of living versions of, Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week lifestyle, I guess. And one of those people I met, I ended up working with, and as kind of a thing on the side, I started basically working on podcast production, which was something my background lent itself pretty well to, having studied, music, and I knew a fair bit about, audio engineering and that kind of thing. Anyway, fast forward to, we were kind of well positioned at the time. Podcasting was taking off. It was 2013, so not long before, the whole serial explosion with podcasting. And one of our early clients was Tim Ferris. So he basically helped him launch his show. And initially, as I was telling you a bit earlier as well, it was Tim Ferris's show was initially going to be just a very short run, about 7 episodes, if my memory serves me well. To see if it was, as a pilot, basically, to see if anyone actually enjoyed it. And, because he wasn't really sure. It was, basically him talking to his friends. Were people going to be that interested in, just long form conversations like that? Obviously, people were. And fortunately, he decided to stick with it. But I find it quite interesting that nowadays, he says that when people walk up to him on the street, the first thing they say is they don't say, oh, I loved your best-selling books, which he's spent years and years and many long nights, writing and all that sort of thing. The first thing they say is, "Oh, I love your podcast." So quite interesting.
Well, that is amazing. It's hard to beat that success.
Yeah.
It must be one of the top podcasts ever. So tell us a little bit about your work today.
Yeah. So as you mentioned earlier, I run a podcast production agency called Spotlight Podcasting. And nowadays I work on very different shows from those ones that I started off with, not the Tim Ferris's of the world. But I think, when people look at starting a show, we're often, and I had this myself, I was quite enamored. I think especially like after I left the consultancy I was working with, I was very enamored with this idea of, personal branding and exciting entrepreneurship and so forth. And granted, it's great, but I think our perception is often quite skewed by the fact that we look at these shows that are in the top 10, they're in the top 100, and we try and emulate those. Whereas what I discovered is actually, I think one of the biggest benefits of podcasting is you don't need to be a Tim Ferris to really get so much out of hosting a show. And I'm sure you're well aware of this, Will, that just the network and the doors that are opened by starting a podcast just makes it's just incredible. I mean, you're doing a daily, like a near daily show, I think now, and you must have had conversations with, tons of people over a year, that you can really build your network. And that's what we noticed with, a lot of the businesses that I've worked with during my career, with that first, Freedom Podcasting, and then with another agency, Microfame Media, and now with Spotlight Podcasting, we've noticed that, especially with, independent consultants, B2B service providers, that a show can really help them with, particularly on the sort of the networking and the business development side of things. And so it's not so much about audience and audience growth, but I think if you just, it's very hard to get people's mindset out of that, because most of the people think, oh, great, a podcast, I'm going to grow an audience and that's going to get me visibility. But in actual fact, one of the best things about interview podcasting is being able to get people on the phone that are just very hard to get hold of normally.
Yeah. So You work with a lot of independent consultants or boutique firms. You mentioned that benefit of the business development side. Can you give us some maybe sanitized case examples from clients that you've worked with of the types of connections that they've made with possible clients?
Yeah, sure. So to give you an example, so one of the chaps we were working with, he basically he helps companies, large companies, create sort of. He used to do sort of these in dinner experiences, these events that were very well organized. He basically had all the elements of the dinner completely set out, and these are basically like team bonding exercises. And anyway, this is sort of an experience that, and he eventually, when he was running this company and helping people with this sort of relationship building, he discovered that his ideal client profile was, Fortune 500 companies, Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies. And so together, we've helped him build a list, and he's reached out to a lot of these people, and he was seeing basically, a booking, he was able to book founders of these massive companies at an 80% success rate. And so he basically, would bring them on and essentially, have conversations. Often, he would go out and visit them, or they come and visit his office in New York. And he was able to just kind of start this relationship. And, the interview is not focused on his service, but he's able to sort of bring that into the conversation and say, oh, by the way, this is what I do. And yeah, I mean, it's not sort of necessarily, it may sound like a very direct sales approach, but I guess quite often it's about building that network, just making people aware of what you do. And often it may be like, oh, actually, this isn't the right time, or yeah, it's not actually what we need, but actually I know someone who'd be great to talk to. And it's about really delivering value first. I mean, you're creating content with someone that basically showcases their expertise, positions them as an authority, and it's basically kind of a win-win situation.
I'm very interested in the idea of podcasts that focus on some interesting niche, some very focused thing. Can you give me any examples of podcasts that you've helped produce that have some very tight focus on a particular industry sector or particular function?
Yeah, let me have a think about this. So yeah, you can get very niche. We've done shows that focus on very, very, very sort of niche, parts of expertise. So maybe it may be like something around it's been as niche as like insurance benefits, or for for employers looking to kind of make their benefits package more comprehensive. And so we've had experts host shows where they just really dive very, very deep into that side of things as well. So
yeah, and a benefit of those is, even if you're a consultant that knows a lot about the space, if doing all those episodes, you're going to learn new stuff and just become aware of new benefits or ways that clients think about it that you hadn't thought about before.
Yeah.
In addition to that benefit of building relationships with folks. Let's talk about your process a little bit. So someone comes to you, let's say they run a boutique firm or independent consultant. They say, Jonathan, I want to start a podcast. What's your process kind of end to end of getting that person up and running?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, we start off with a 4 to 6 week. Usually takes that time. It can take shorter. It can take a little bit longer. But usually it falls within that kind of range. It's basically sort of a launch program that we run people through, and we basically help with all those minute decisions that make such a big difference. I think, podcasting is something that is very much the Wild West. Anyone can start one up and anyone can get going. But there are just so many, I mean, this yourself, there's so many decisions to make, especially at the beginning. And so it's often like really good idea to get off on the right foot. There's all the questions around, what's the right strategy for the show? What are your goals? Is this show going to hit those goals? What equipment do you need? And so many different things. And podcasting is always evolving at the same time as well. So there are always like these new tools and these new things to constantly stay up to date with. And that's where we found that, solo operators, independents, or, people where it's like they just don't have time to stay on top of all this stuff. They need a team. And whether that's us or, whether they build their own team, those are all options. But I think, but it's a good idea to set off on the right foot. Bearing in mind that there are now, I think latest figures, just checked the other day, is that there are over 2 million podcasts out there, but the majority of them are pod faded. The majority of them are no longer running, and that's a real pity. I think, and I've spoken to so many people where they started a show with great intentions and they were very excited about it at the beginning, but eventually there's a friend of mine who. He had a show that was in the gaming space. It was something he was very passionate about, and what he was aiming for was he was trying to build a really big audience and sell to sponsors, which is what a lot of people really think of first when they think of starting a podcast. And people talk about this magic number of, once you get to 50,000 downloads a month, then you're set. You can get decent sponsorship that should be able to pay the bills. He wasn't able to do it. He got that. He achieved that number, but he was still unable to really make the show work out financially. So I think that's really a key thing to just bear in mind. It is a time investment, and you just need to bear that in mind when it comes to how much time you're going to spend on it. How much money you're going to invest and so forth. You want to make sure that it is sustainable in the long run.
Yeah. So walk me through that set of initial questions and decisions that people need to make. You say that's really critical. What's the checklist of questions that a listener of this show would need to think about if they want thinking about starting their own show?
Yeah. So I think first of all, the main thing is like just getting very clear on what your goals are with a show, what you're ultimately trying to achieve. People might say, brand awareness, great brand awareness, but what for? So we go down the sort of the 5 whys route, just trying to get down to the real core of, why are we starting a show? What are the ultimate goals? And then we can start, assigning metrics and trying to figure out, okay, how can we correlate, these goals to the outcomes of the show? And then we basically build a strategy around that. Like I said, the strategy that we kind of focus on is using a podcasting as part of an outreach strategy to connect with those ideal clients or industry partners or referral partners. And, that's basically kind of the strategy that we, really kind of hone in on. That said, I think podcasting can also be used as a networking tool where maybe it's more, maybe it's a little bit more broad than that, maybe it's like you're just looking to kind of grow your network and you're not necessarily so focused particularly on your niche. And those kinds of shows can work very well as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what's the whole series of decisions that you'd help people with? I imagine that you have some sort of checklist like, okay, well, once you figure out the strategy, you think about what kind of listeners am I going to attract? What sort of should the format of the show be? Is it interview based? Is it a short, edited show? Is it a full long form show? Is it what's the name going to be? What do the show notes look like? What's the logo? Like what's the full list of other decisions that someone needs to make at the beginning?
Yeah, there are a lot of decisions. We could go into like all the minutiae. I would say though that just to focus on the core ones. So I mentioned goals and strategy. I would say also like if you're doing a show, like I mentioned, that has where you're very focused on the sort of using it as part of your prospecting strategy. I would say like one of the key decisions at the very beginning is to really figure out who your guests are going to be. And focus. A lot of people talk about think about your listener avatar. We prefer to think of guest avatar first. And so thinking of, okay, maybe it's like your ideal client profile, basically your ICP. Maybe you have a couple of those. Well, pick the one that's, that you enjoy working with the most, or that's the most profitable, but make that decision and then really hone in on, what are the characteristics of those people. Like, can you put together like a short list of, say, 20 people that fit that profile? What are their sensibilities? What do they resonate with? What are their interests? What communities? And that will give you a sense of, like, when you launch the show, exactly which, channels you're going to be reaching out to as well, where all these people are available. Because the visibility factor is also important. When you bring someone on a show, one of the other things that comes out of that is, obviously you have that audio content, and podcasting is great for people who are busy. You can, fit it into their schedules. But it also provides an opportunity for you to create a lot of marketing assets. You get this content that you can repurpose in so many different formats. That's one of the things that I really like about audio, is just the way that you can turn it into quotable images, you can turn it into audiograms. There's so much you could do with it. But that also just raises the visibility of your guest, and also raises your brand as well. So that, you share a quotable from them on, LinkedIn, you tag them, they like it, their network is most likely going to see that in their feed. So the chances are, if you're very focused on that guest, the chances are that their peers are going to start seeing your brand as well. So before you even ask someone else to be on the show that's fits within that same line of guests, the chances are they've probably already seen you around already. So in a way, it's like they know you already before you know them.
Talk to me about the process of creating this auxiliary content, and like what are the different forms that you are referring to? So you mentioned audiograms. People have probably seen those, where it's like a static picture and then you see the little wiggly line going up and down as the quote goes, and maybe you see the quote itself. But what are some other types of content, and how could let's say a listener of this show has their own show, mm-hmm. What are some ways to go and to create those? Or so talk to me about some of that auxiliary content.
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned audiograms. There's a great tool for that, Headliner, that will allow you to, just like really customize your graphic asset, include like an image of your guest. It will also allow you, if you have, so we usually, like, we publish podcasts purely as audio, but we often also have people record the video. So it's usually done over Zoom or Riverside or Squadcast. So we get the video recording from that as well. We won't necessarily use the full video recording, because it's not, it's just two talking heads, essentially. It works much better as an audio podcast format. But we will take video clips from that. We'll transcribe those, we'll include the captions, and basically publish those as, mini clips that are kind of teasers for the, for the audio, the podcast episode itself.
And where do those get engagement? Do you put those on LinkedIn or on Twitter or YouTube, or where's the best place to get engagement on that kind of material?
I would say it really depends where your target audience hangs out. And when I say target audience, kind of referring back as well, like, we often find if you start with the guest avatar first, in most cases your listener avatar usually correlates to that as well. You like, the work is already done, because often the peers of the guests that you're speaking to are going to be tuning into the show as well. Mm-hmm. Especially if you frame it the correct way. If you just call it, let's say your show's about an VP of operations at oil and gas. It could just be like the VP of operations at oil and gas show, or some variation of that. But basically, it's where they hang out. Like, usually in B2B, in most cases, the answer will be LinkedIn. But it never hurts necessarily to post on other channels as well. We usually just make sure that every platform has its like differences and its quirks and the ways that social copy works. So we just make sure that when the people we work with, are posting that they are using the right dimensions, that they have all those things in mind as well.
Okay. If someone wants to launch their own show with your agency or an agency similar to yours, what's the typical fee structure if someone wants to get an agency to help take care of all the heavy lifting of designing the logo and writing the show notes and helping with the audio production, adding a little music and doing all those pieces so that all they need to do is kind of show up for the interview itself? Like, what's the typical fee structure?
Yeah, so for sort of a full end-to-end service like the one that we offer, we basically have sort of a flat fee structure per month, with packages starting from about $2,000 per month. Now, and I see, sort of like when it comes to, outsourcing your podcast, I would say like there are a couple of different categories, right? You've got kind of, on the lower end, you can go after freelancers and you can find, someone to do your audio editing for you. And you can find someone else to do your show notes and that sort of thing, which is fine. And you can really operate things on a shoestring. However, you don't necessarily have someone to kind of oversee the whole operation and just make sure that things fit together. And again, like make sure that you can hire consultants, and that's another route you can go down. But that's sort of on the lower end. Then I would say a step up from that might be sort of like a budget production service where they're doing the time consuming things like show notes and podcast production, but they're kind of giving you somewhat generic podcast advice. We're very, like I say, we're quite specific on working with consultants and people in B2B, so we kind of feel we fit into that range just above. And then I would say above that you have sort of like the marketing agencies who will probably double your budget, but they'll go out and find the right people for you, and it will probably be more of a package that also includes other things like we'll publish your book and we'll manage this and that for you as well.
Mm-hmm. And so for like the $2,000 a month, that would be for what, like a weekly show or? Yeah,
typically a weekly show. Usually like there's usually a direct kind of correlation. Like there's basic math that you can do to figure out, okay, is this show gonna pay off its investment? And the thing is like if you're doing a weekly show, typically you're doing 52 interviews a year, so that's 52 relationships. And out of those relationships, especially if you have a high ticket offer, a consulting offer, all you need is like a couple of those relationships to result in sales for the podcast to pay off. So that's usually sort of the scenario that we find people working with.
Yes, I agree. You're not trying to monetize the podcast itself, but you only need a few of those relationships to germinate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then as part of that, you would be helping with creating this like micro content and figuring out where to post it and writing some of the like the LinkedIn posts for people to do and so forth.
Yeah, basically soup to nuts. Everything everything that's entailed is launching a show that's done professionally, and is distributed and leveraged as much as it can be. Yeah.
Well, there's certainly for busy consultants, there is a bit of an activation energy.
Yeah.
If people are trying to do it themselves, when you're trying to run your own practice and serve clients, and then also to get the audio engineering done and to make the transcript and to create the show notes and to upload it to Libsyn or whatever thing you're using. And then what are some of your tips and lessons learned for people on how to kind of get the word out about their show? So other than just posting on LinkedIn or so forth, what are some of the other tips? Do you have people, for example, put together like a package for their guest to use to help promote it? You talk about newsletters. What are some other things you've seen people do that maybe that your firm does to help get the word out and make sure the right listeners are hearing about the show?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done with the people that we work with is we'll send out emails on their behalf that have all the social assets for their guests. So it's really leveraging, the guests' willingness to promote their interviews. And so that will just basically mean, we'll generate sort of these links that will have pre-populated tweets, LinkedIn posts, Facebook, and so forth. So that's the key way. I think also just like really, a lot of people kind of spray and pray with their podcasts. We've often found that converting people from social or email straight to a podcast is a little tricky, and so often the medium that works best for converting podcast listeners, because if you think about it, I think it's Edison Research, they have surveys and statistics that show that on average, I think it's 3 out of 10 Americans listens to podcasts on a regular basis. So if you think about that, when you promote your content on social, chances are only 3 out of 10 people that see that will actually have any chance of listening to your show on a regular basis. And so that's why one of the things that we advocate for is promoting on the same channel on other podcasts, because 10 out of 10 people who listen to you, if you're interviewing on another show, are podcast consumers. And the same applies for podcast ads as well. So those are all things that we also support people with as well.
Oh, I see. That's an interesting statistic. I suppose the other thing that suggests is that you might not think about trying to convert everyone to be a listener of your show, but if it is the case that 7 out of 10 are not listening to podcasts, it's even more important to be repurposing some of your content so people can consume it the way they want. Like maybe they just read a quote from your show, or maybe they listen to a 20-second snippet that's an audiogram so that they can get some of the core nuggets from your show, or maybe you create a LinkedIn article or a blog post based on your show and use it on, sort of repurpose this asset.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, we see those pieces of content as standalone pieces of content themselves, that provide value and are of interest and build brand awareness. So we see that helpful, particularly from a visibility standpoint, and also for people who, I have this problem myself. Like there's so much noise in social media, and there's this little bit of this FOMO, like, oh, I should be producing content, and it's difficult to keep up with that. But if you have a regular ongoing show where you're able to, you have someone or a system there that's producing these like little core pieces, these little assets of micro content for you on a regular basis, you don't have to worry about that so much anymore.
Yeah, you can do it on your behalf. All right, fantastic. Well, Jonathan, this has been a great overview and helpful guide, I think, for people that are thinking about starting their show and maybe using an agency like yours. If people wanted to follow up with you and get in touch, where would you point them online?
So I think the best place to go is actually another podcast that we have recently started called podcastingforconsultants.net. That's the website, and you can obviously just find the show by searching for Podcasting for Consultants on any podcast player. And in that show, we kind of dive more into all the, basically a lot of the questions that you've asked here, and a lot more. Basically everything that goes into what's required for launching a show.
Fantastic. Well, we'll include that link in the show notes. Sounds like a great resource. I'm going to check out that show. And for listeners, since you've gotten all the way to the end here, if you go to umbrex.com and you click on the Unleash tab, you can sign up for the weekly email for this show, where if you don't want to listen to all 7 episodes every week, but you want to pick and choose, in that weekly email, I'll let you know what the most recent episodes are. We occasionally have some bonus material, such as some book giveaways and resources you can download. So check that out. And if you are so inclined to give this show a 5-star review on iTunes, it would be much appreciated. It does help people discover the show, and it just makes my day. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining. It was really great chatting with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Will.